Tov, Boker Tov. First of all, as usual, our shurim this year are in memory of Elisheva Frist, Elisheva Sima Bat Zalman, Zechuna Lebracha. This morning's shir and all the shurim today in particular are in memory of Ruvain ben Beryl Leib Halevi, sponsored by Batsheva Cantor in memory of our husband, the first Yortzeit this week. I was also asked by the powers that be, for those who are watching, who will be watching on the archives on YouTube, to make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Okay, that was a commercial. Like, comment, and subscribe. This was commercial message, right? Okay, Rabbi Yisrael Najara is not only a street in Shchunat Kiryat Moshe that the Angel's Bakery factory, I think it's no longer there, I think they've closed down, but runs through Kiryat Moshe. Yisrael Najara, we met him already in a previous poem. I pointed out that he was a Baal Tshuva. He was discovered in a nightclub singing in Aleppo, which is Halab in Syria. Somebody got a hold of him, some Lubavitcher most probably, in the 16th century, and brought him to Tzfat, and he became one of the Kabbalists, part of Rabbi Yosef Karo, Rabbi Moshe Al-Shich, Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, and the whole group of the Kabbalists of the 16th century of Tzfat. He also spent time in the main shul in the city of Gaza. So if you'd like to visit there one day, I just got a artificial intelligence film clip that was put out by Donald Trump about Trump Gaza Hotel. So you might be interested in spending your summer vacation there and so on. Right, winter vacation. Right, the casinos, right. I actually just put out an ad from my being a scholar in residence there one day. And it'll be held in the synagogue of Rabbi Yisrael Najara in downtown Gaza City. In all seriousness, the poem Ribon Olam v'Almaya, which many of us sing Friday night according to many different Nugunim. In our house, we happen to like the Kalbach version, but there are many Nigunim. The Kalbach version, by the way, sets well to Lecha Dodi, which many shuls use it for the first part. Before Lote Boshi, they use the Kalbach, the Ribon Nigun. What I gave here was the translation, the parallel translation in Hebrew, so that will help us along, because the Aramaic is a little bit Chinese for many of us. And even those who are proficient in the Aramaic of the Talmud Bavli, and we know the Talmud Bavli was written in Aramaic, most of it, not all, but there's also a dialect, which is the Aramaic of Eretz Yisrael. And the Aramaic of Eretz Yisrael has its roots in Tanakh. There are already sections of Tanakh written in Aramaic, in Ezra and Nehemiah. But if you take the book of Daniel, most of the book is written in Aramaic, and it's in Eretz Yisrael Aramaic. The author, Yisrael Najara, borrows phrases one after the other from the book of Daniel. So the truth of the matter is, to understand the poem of what he's doing does not necessarily mean that you have to know and be proficient with the book of Daniel. All you have to do is see the psukim that he's lifting them out of context, and that's what I've provided in most of the sources, as you can see, come from the book of Daniel. Except that it would be helpful to say a word about the book itself, why the book was written in Aramaic. So when Nebuchadnezzar, the Melech Bavel, takes over Eretz Yisrael, and that takes place approximately 18 years before the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. We sometimes assume that when we talk about Galut Bavel, the Babylonian exile, it all happened on the same day. The Babylonians took over Eretz Yisrael on one day and destroyed Beit Mikdash on one day and threw Am Yisrael out of Eretz Yisrael in one day. Well, I hate to break it to you, but that's not what happened. There is a staged Galut, and it begins 18 years before the destruction of the first Beit Mikdash. In essence, the Galut began way before that, before the Babylonians are in town. the empire that ruled the Middle East before the Babylonians were the Assyrians, Ashur. And about 110 years before the Churban, so 10 out of the 12 tribes were exiled to the east. Where did the 10 Shvatim, the 10 tribes, go? We don't know where they went, but some went far and some came close and stayed in what later would be called Babylon. And therefore, it could be assumed that when ultimately there was a Galut Bavel, a Babylonian exile, after the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, you could assume that the population was then all mixed up. And there are some who believe, some like in the likes of Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's grandson, that when we came back to Eretz Yisrael, the beginning of Bayit Sheni, the second Beit HaMikdash era, we were a mishmash of all the 12 Shvatim. Now, nobody had a Tudat Zehut, that's going to say what Shevet they belonged to. They already didn't know what Shevet. Maybe some still had family recollections, but it was already a mishmash. But it was good enough for Rabbeinu Tam to suggest that in the second Beit HaMikdash, when we kept Shemitah, the seventh year of not working the land, we also kept the Yovel year, the 50th year, which is after 7 times 7, after the 49th year. And the reason why Rabbeinu Tam says it was good enough that it was a mishmash, because all agree that you have to have 12 Shvatim in Eretz Yisrael in order for the mitzvah of Yovel to be in force. And the only question is are 12 Shvatim not in their designated sections good enough? According to the Rambam, it's not good enough. You have to have 12 Shvatim in their designated sections of Eretz Yisrael in order for the mitzvah of Yovel to get started. And therefore, according to the Rambam, there was no Yovel any longer in the second Beit HaMikdash era. And according to the Rambam, if there was no Yovel, there also was no Shemitah. So all Shemitah was Midrabanan, was rabbinic, as it is today, according to 99.9% of the opinions, that it's a rabbinic mitzvah today, because we don't have all the necessary halachic prerequisites to enforce it. But with regard to Yovel, according to the Rambam, it takes the pasuk literally, Yovel hi lichol yoshveha in Parshat Bahar. You have to have 12 Shvatim, 12 tribes in their designated place. But Rabbeinu Tam argues and says that it's good enough that you have representatives of 12 Shvatim, even if it's all mixed up in the total Jewish population. And that we did have in the second Beit HaMikdash era, because they came back from Bavel. So where were they? They integrated, they assimilated into the general Jewish population of Bavel and no longer maintained Shevet identity. But there were 12 Shvatim in Eretz Yisrael, according to Rabbeinu Tam, in the second Beit HaMikdash, allowing for the mitzvah of Yovel to be activated on a biblical Deoraita level. Fine. So now that's the first Galut, Galut Ashur, the Assyrian Galut. But now we're talking about the Babylonian. And this is already 18 years before the destruction of Beit HaMikdash, where Bavel, Nebuchadnezzar, already conquers Eretz Yisrael. And what he wants, he even allows the local king in Yehuda to remain in his task as a type of governor of sorts. And that lasts for 18 years. It's another 11 years of Yehoiakim. It's in the third or fourth year of his kingdom that the Babylonians take over. So he has 11 years to his credit, so another 7 years. And then there's Yechonia, or he has two names. So the Galut Yechonia, he lasts for a whole 3 months. And then Nebuchadnezzar decides to send him to Galut with many of the intellectuals, because he fears that the intellectuals can inspire a revolt. So let's shave off the top and bring the intellectuals to Bavel. And if you recall, Megillat Esther, Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan habira ushmo Mordechai ben Yair ben Shemi ben Kish Yishimini asher hagla mirushalayim im hagola asher hagleta im Yechonia melech Yudah. So Mordechai is one of those who goes down 11 years. So this would be already 7 years before the Churban, Galut Yechonia. And then there's Tzidkiyahu, it's 11 years. Then there's Tzidkiyahu. Tzidkiyahu is the last melech of Yehuda, and he's 11 years, and then he's taken out with Nebuchadnezzar. And then the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, at that time, and Nebuchadnezzar still doesn't give up with the idea of having local Jewish leadership and appoints the governor, Gedaliah ben Achikam. He lasts 2 months until he's assassinated, and then Nebuchadnezzar realizes that Jews can't run their own affairs, and that's when the Galut essentially begins. So Tzom Gedaliah, the fast of Gedaliah, is actually the fast of the loss of Jewish population and any even local government in Eretz Israel. Now, in this interim time, you have people who Nebuchadnezzar sought to cultivate from the Jewish people. He knew that Jews are smart, Jews have capabilities, and he took the cream of the crop, 4 people, Daniel, Mishael, Hananel, and Azariah. 4 people, for he trained them to be government officials. So first he made sure they knew the language, the Lashon HaKazdim. Kazdim is Bavel, Eretz HaKazdim. So they knew the local language well. They knew the local idioms well. They knew how to administer. And he incorporated these 4 Jews as top positions in the government of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Bavel. And he became top advisors. And what happened was, one day, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And it's a very disturbing dream. And I remember we learned about this dream when we learned Parshat Miketz, when Paroi has his dream. Because by Paroi it says, Vatipaem rucho, Paroi was very, very agitated. Now Paroi knew the dream and told it over to Yosef for interpretation. All his advisors could do nothing with it that satisfied. They all gave suggestions. The Torah doesn't bother giving us what their suggestions were, but it didn't work. Paroi was just not satisfied. But ultimately, Yosef is brought out of prison and is brought to front of Paroi and gets the job done. Rashi tells us there's a difference between Vatipaem rucho and Vatitpaem rucho. That somehow the agitation of Nebuchadnezzar after his dream was twice as much as Paroi in Mitzrayim with his dream. The reason was because Rashi tells us Paroi remembered his dream but didn't know the interpretation. Nebuchadnezzar forgot the dream but knew it was important and obviously didn't know the interpretation. Other parshanim and simple pshat of the Sefer Daniel is that he knew the interpretation but was testing the advisors. And he was saying, I had a dream, sounds like Martin Luther King, I had a dream and I don't know the interpretation. But you're going to tell me what my dream was. So in other words, before you got to tell me the interpretation, he insisted that the advisors were smart enough to know what the dream was. And they didn't know what the dream was, none of them, including Daniel. And he summarily started executing his advisors because they weren't good enough. And Daniel was on line to be executed, and a Kadosh Baruch Hu sends him a vision of what the dream was. And he spells it out. He tells him what the dream was, and he tells him what the implication of the dream. I mean, the dream had to do with a tall image of somebody very tall with a head of gold and different parts to it and so on. The implication was they're going to be 4 different monarchies after you, and then ultimately a Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to take over and bring OUisrael back. So Nebuchadnezzar was very, very satisfied with this Daniel because he was on the ball. He had the dream right, the interpretation sounded right, and he's now upgraded to even a higher position in government. You have dialogues in the language of Bavel, the Lashon Kasdim, going on. This is the background of Ribon Olam. So what does this have to do with Shabbat being a Shabbos song? The truth is, it doesn't say a word about Shabbat in this whole poem. But it is a poem about 2 themes from the book of Daniel that can very much be applied to Shabbat in light of many of the Zmirot that we've been doing, where the theme of Shabbat somehow symbolizing the spirit of Acharit HaYamim, the end of days, we've seen it throughout. Mein Olam Haba, Yom Shabbat Menucha, the Shabbat, the whole Lechadodi of Hitnari and Lotevoshi and so on. We saw it in the Lechadodi. These are themes that were floating around Tzfat in the 16th century. Every Shabbat, you're bringing in the spirit of Acharit HaYamim, end of days. And to that end, this Karibon is clearly a Shabbos song relevant for Shabbat as well. But what are the 2 primary themes of the book of Daniel, why it became incorporated into Tanakh. It's part of the Ketuvim. And I'll just say that there's a whole question. Why is it in the Ketuvim? If Daniel was a Navi, it should be part of the Nevi'im Achronim somehow there. So I'm not bringing a proof, but I'm just saying that for those who are knowledgeable enough of the Old Testament of the church, which is our Tanakh, basically, before the New Testament is added on, in the division of the Tanakh of the Old Testament, Daniel belongs to the Nevi'im. So they answered the question by actually believing that Daniel belonged to Sefer Nevi'im. Nevertheless, there's a Gemara Masechet Baba Batra, Daf Yudalet and Tetvav, that gives us the order of the 24 books of the canonized Tanakh of Chazal, and Daniel is part of the Ketuvim. So we'll leave it at that. It's part of the Ketuvim. And the two primary themes are, one is Mesirat Nefesh. Daniel is willing to risk his life for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Risk his life, without a doubt. One comes early in the game when he's being trained in the first chapter. And the instructions of somebody who was his guard. They were almost like prisoners, but given provisions. They were given delicacies, good food. Nebuchadnezzar wanted his representatives to physically look healthy and nice and so on, and not only know how to run the show, but be attractive as human beings. So Daniel and his chaverim decided they're not touching the food. And there's a whole question, did they think that the food was not kosher or not? Whatever it was, there was a chashash. I mean, the wine they didn't want to touch, and the bread they didn't want to touch. Did they already know about pat akum and yayin nesach and so on? The bottom line is they didn't eat it, and they asked the guard to bring them fruits and vegetables. So the guard brings fruits and vegetables, except that he's nervous that these guys aren't going to look healthy at the end of the day. And what happens is, miraculously, they looked very healthy. You know why? Because to eat fruits and vegetables is very healthy, right? Right? So they did look good. They did look healthy at the end of the day. And they strike a deal with this guy, and he brings them fruits and vegetables and so on. But it was a tremendous act of Mesirat Nefesh that was repeated in the last year and a quarter by our hostages. Maybe not all, and I'm not blaming anyone who ate whatever they gave them. But to think that they didn't eat the little morsel of bread on Pesach, and to think that if they would have asked a shaila, in these circumstances of utter starvation, could they eat the bread on Pesach? And they didn't. Or to try their best not to eat anything that they thought wasn't kosher? Or to make Kiddush Friday night in the clear blue sky without holding an imaginary cup of wine? I mean, this is gvura that's unsurpassed. I mean, we've heard such Maisa Gvura in the Shoah as well. We have heard. This is what Daniel was all about. And that's what he was teaching us. And then at the end of the Babylonian era, what happens is that the Bavel actually collapses. Bavel absolutely collapses, and Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar that that's what's going to happen. And Nebuchadnezzar accepts it. And the Persians take over. And the first king of Persia was Darius, known as Daryavesh. Daniel is almost like the status of Yosef in the house of Paroi. He's top of the game there in the palace of Daryavesh. And the other ministers are very, very upset and jealous. So they suggest to the king, that there should be a thing that for 1 month, anybody who prays for anything, praise to the king. The king becomes the god for a month, like king for a day, becomes god for the month. And they figured they're going to trap Daniel. The idea was that whoever was caught praying to somebody else is going to be thrown into the lion's den, the Guv Arayot, the lion's den. And they knew that Daniel's going to be praying. And they catch him at the open window, facing Yerushalayim, talking, communicating with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And the Gemara learns many halachot from this, the idea of facing Yerushalayim and Yerushalayim, returning to Yerushalayim as being the most important request that we should have in our tefillot in the absence of Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. And he's caught in the act, and he's thrown, and the king is heartbroken, because if you remember from Megillat Esther, the Persian rule, after Achashverosh, made the rules, I can't take it back. I signed my name that Haman can kill the Jews. All right, I can make a new law now that the Jews can fight back. That's all. That was the best he could do. But that was the Persian rule, and we have it in Sefer Nehemiah. We know this was the crazy rule, but it was a rule. So the king feels awful. Oh, got to throw him into the Guf Arayot. And they throw him there. They come back in the morning thinking they're going to find flesh and bones. And there is Daniel, alive and well. And the king is so thrilled, he takes him out and he throws the other Sarim into the Guf Arayot because they don't manage to come out at the end of the day. But the idea that of dedication, of not losing sight of returning to Eretz Yisrael, this is the message of the book of Daniel. Aleph, Mesirat Nefesh for Kadosh Baruch Hu, no matter where you are, you're willing to give up your life just to keep the idea of what Torah represents, keep it rolling. And the second is not to lose sight of Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim, no matter where you are. There's a statement from Rav Kook, and he wrote it when he was in London during the World War I era, when he went to speak at a Agudas Yisrael convention of rabbis, the Knessia Gedolah, because he told them they all have to pack up and come to Eretz Yisrael, and they didn't exactly take him seriously. But he got stuck in London because the war broke out, World War I, and he writes there that anybody who's in Chutz La'aretz, but his heart is in Eretz Yisrael, almost similar to Rabbi Yehuda Levi, Ani b'marav v'libi b'mizrach, zocher lechama v'chama skulot shebe'eretz Yisrael. He's worthy with some of the many attributes of Eretz Yisrael. Now, Rav Kook doesn't delineate, what they are, but that sounded good to me. Zocher lekama v'chama skulot shebe'eretz Yisrael. And here you see, this is the theme of the book of Daniel. This is what Yisrael Najara is now putting into this poem. The idea of not losing sight, but addressing HaKadosh Baruch Hu no differently than the way Daniel addressed Nebuchadnezzar and Daryavesh, the respect that he had for the king as king, and now flipping it to something of Kedusha. It almost reminds me of one of my great teachers at YU in the supplementary rabbinics Friday morning classes. It was Rabbi Joseph Lookstein, Zichron Livracha, one of the great American rabbis of KJ. And people don't know that the school that's associated with that shul, Ramaz, was named after his father-in-law, Rabbi Moshe Zvulun Margolis. That's what Ramaz is, Moshe Zvulun. Rabbi Moshe Zvulun Margolis, he was the Rav of KJ, and was part of that European brand of rabbis. And Joe Lookstein, Zichron Livracha, was the first generation of American rabbis to rabbinate in America, clean-shaven and speak English properly, and so on. The previous ones spoke Yiddish, and we were losing a lot of young people to conservative congregations and so on, because they were really more up-to-date and modern and so on. But Joe Lookstein knew that he didn't have the opportunity that we did as Talmidim in the yeshiva to hear first type of darshanim who could teach us how to make a drasha. So we had Rabbi Wolberg, Zichron Livracha, from Borough Park, who came every week to teach us how to put together a drasha. We had Rabbi Lookstein to teach us how to put a drasha, but he said he didn't have that opportunity. So what did he do? He went on Sunday to hear the Reverend Henry Fosdick, a known Methodist preacher, and he wanted to learn from him style. So can you imagine? He went to hear him. And one day, Rabbi Lookstein told us, he actually copied a sermon from Reverend Fosdick. He took out Yeshu and put in a Kadosh Baruch Hu, delivered it you can do this on word processing. You delete and you put in, and he delivered the drasha of Fosdick with a Kadosh Baruch Hu's name and trimmings in his shul. And he said, people said this was his best drasha. Rabbi Lookstein says, you know what I did? I was Megayer the drasha. I was Megayer. I converted the drasha. He was Megayer the drasha. Yisrael Najara is Megayer. He's converting things that Daniel uses when talking to Nebuchadnezzar and flipping it, that he's talking about a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Let's see it. Ribon Olam ve'almaya. I'm going to read the Hebrew translation on its left. Kadosh Baruch Hu is the master of the whole world, of the universe. Ribon Olam ve'almaya. Atu malka melech malchaya. You are the King of Kings. Atahu melech malchaya melachim. Oved gvurtech v'timhaya. Maseh gvuratcha v'niftra. All your wonderful, wonderful works of grandeur and greatness. Shvar kadamach lahachvaya. It's just so worthy for me to express. Okay, so that's the introduction. So where does he get these phrases? Let's start looking at the sources. Daniel Perek Zayin Pasuk Yudchet. Right on the bottom, first it's the first source. V'kablun malchuta kadishe elyonin v'yachsenun malchuta ad olma va'ad olam olmaya. This is a direct reference to OUisrael, by the way, in the context of the seventh chapter of Daniel, and he's talking about a Kadosh Baruch Hu as someone who reigned ad olma va'ad olam olmaya. The olam ula olmei olamim in very simple Hebrew. The olam ula olmei olmaya, but in the context of Daniel, he's using it in terms of time. Right? Kadosh Baruch Hu is forever, eternity, eternity. What Yisrael Najara does, he redefines that term that it has to do with place. It's a Kadosh Baruch Hu is reigning all over the place. It's not a time factor, but it's a place factor. Antu malka melech malchaya. You are Ribon Olam ve'almaya. Antu malka melech malchaya. You're the King of kings all over. Kol olamim, all the worlds, all the places. And your greatness is just worthy for me to speak out, to express. And he gets down to the next, if you look at source number 2, Ant Malka Melech Malchaya. Right? So it's reference in the poem to Kadosh Baruch Hu, no doubt, because he uses the word Shem Hashem, Yud and Hey. Now we already mentioned several times over that Yud and Hey, like in Ya'ech Sof, the poem that we did, Ya'ech Sof, why did he use Ya'ech Sof? But he played out Haya, Hoveh, and Yiyeh in the poem itself. So Haya, Hoveh, Yiyeh is the Shem Havaya, Yud, Hey, Vav, and a Hey, but it's truncated in the time of Galut, as we read in Parshat B'Shalach, that when a Kadosh Baruch Hu is not fully recognized, so the kisei becomes without an aleph, case. Yad, ya, yud, hey, without the yud, ke, vav, ke, case, kisei, without the aleph. It's a Kadosh Baruch Hu not fully being recognized because there's still an Amalek out there. And the Rabbi Aaron Mikarlin uses that also, Kayach Sof. We are now in a situation where Kadosh Baruch Hu is partially recognized, but not fully recognized. So too, Rabbi Yisrael Najara, sitting in Eretz Yisrael, 16th century in Tzfat, Kadosh Baruch Hu is not fully recognized, but we're looking forward to the day where he will be. So that's why it's Kayach Sof, Kaya Ribon, Antu Malka Melech Machaya, you are the King of Kings. So look at source number 2, Ant Malka Melech Machaya is lifting it right out of this pasuk. But who is the context of Daniel Perek Bet? He's addressing the king Nebuchadnezzar. And he calls Nebuchadnezzar, you are the king, Melech Melachim, the king of kings. So look at the Gemara Masechet Shvuot, source number 3. Kol Malchaya, every use of the word Malchaya in Aramaic, from the word Melech, Ha'amurim beDaniel, that are used in the book of Daniel, Chol. It's not a holy name of God. It just means a king. It means a king, that's all. Chutz mizeh, except for this one that we just quoted, Shehu Kodesh. This one, it means a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Antu Malka Melech Malchaya. This pasuk from Daniel. Daniel is talking to Nebuchadnezzar, but he really means a Kadosh Baruch Hu. He's looking at him, he's saying, Antu Malka Melech Malchaya, but like Shlomo Kalbach would roll his eyes up. He wasn't looking at Nebuchadnezzar. He had Kadosh Baruch Hu in mind. This idea that a word could be Kodesh or Chol, we have in Parshat Vayera with when the Malachim come to visit Avram Avinu, and he tells them to wait. It says Aleph Daled Nun Yud. So there's a machloket, there's a debate. Is he talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to see him, and now he's asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hold on, I have guests here. I want to take care. Or is he talking to the visitors and using the plural of Adoni, which means sir, but saying it in plural, Adonai, saying it to the three of them, but it's Chol, it's not Kodesh, and he's saying, do me a favor, hold on, I have HaKadosh Baruch Hu on the line. Just hold on, don't run away. So we have a dispute whether it's Kodesh or Chol. And the idea that it's Kodesh, that it's a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and Avram Avinu tells Avram Avinu, hold on, I have guests here, I have to serve him, led to the famous Mamar Chazal, Gdola Hachnasat Orchim Yoter Mikabalat Panei Ashchina. Greater is the mitzvah of receiving guests than receiving a Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's in line with the verse that the Shem Hashem is Kodesh. But it can go either way. And there's another nafkamina. Nafkamina means ramification. What comes out from this? Another ramification. When the Sefer writes the Sefer Torah Parshas Vayera, many Seferim have a minhag to run to the mikveh not only every first thing in the morning, but every time they write Shem Hashem. Every time they write Shem Hashem, a Sefer goes to mikveh. That's why if you're looking for the keys for the men's mikveh in the neighborhood, go to the Sefer. He's got the keys. Because he's using that men's mikveh sometimes several times a day, and then he has a proper kavanah for Kedushat Shem. You have to have special kavanah that what I'm writing now is inculcated with the sanctity of God's name. That's why the Rebbe's grandfather, Reb Chaim from Brisk, said that Shem Hashem in print is never Kodesh, because a printing press can't sanctify God's name. And therefore, the pages that have Yud Hey on it, which is one of the seven names of God that cannot be erased, there's no chiyuv, no obligation of putting this in Geniza afterwards, because there's no sanctity, there's no kedusha to it. I mean, I wouldn't throw it just in the garbage, but I would put it like in the mixzur. You're allowed to do that in the recycling, paper recycling. You're allowed to do that. That's honorable enough for this. That's the machloket. What does he do for Parshat Vayera? So l'chumra goes to the mikveh. I'm sure l'chumra goes to the mikveh, but that's the nafkamina. If it's not kodesh, he doesn't have to go to the mikveh. So here, if a sefer was writing a Sefer Daniel on parchment and writes Antu Malka Melech Machaya, so here it's not really a Shem Hashem. It's a nickname. It's a description of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, like Rachum and Chanun and so on. So that those names can be erased. They can be erased and so on. The whole machloket between the Rambam and the Ravid, Rabbi Avram and David, if you're allowed to mention the nicknames of a Kadosh Baruch Hu in the bathroom. That's why some people don't say Shabbat Shalom in a public bathroom on Shabbat, because Shalom is a nickname of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's why some people write in a letter Shalom, they write Shin Lamed Vav and a Stroichel and don't write it out, because Shalom is a nickname of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's why. Yeah. But you're allowed to erase the word Shalom. That's not nobody argues with that. So the Gemara says that this Antu Malka in Sefer Daniel was Kodesh, and clearly Yisrael Najara adopts that by using it in the poem Antu Malka Melech Machaya. He's taking it out of context of Daniel Perek Bet, but in its usage as a description of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And now you have the last line, Shvar Kadamach Lahachvaya, is also comes from Daniel in source number 4, where it says Shvar Kadamach Lahachvaya. It's that here. It's actually Nebuchadnezzar, if I remember correctly, it's Nebuchadnezzar actually saying praises about a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and he's saying it's really proper to Kadosh Baruch Hu to say praises. Let's look at the next stanza. Shvachin asader tzafar v'ramsha. I am going to organize my praise for God day and night. Boker v'erev. Tzafar v'ramsha means day and night. Lach elaha kadisha brak al nafsha. To you, who is the holy God, who created every animal, every nefesh, every animal. And he created Irin Kadishin, the Malachim. And he created Bnei Anasham, human beings. And he created Chevat Bara v'Ov Shemaya, all the animals, the wild animals, and all the birds of the sky. It means basically, Bara Shamayim V'Aretz. And it says, day and night, I'm going to speak the uninterrupted. I really should be uninterrupted. And we'll see this in the very next stanza. Rav Revin Ovdech V'Takifin. Your actions are great. I'm going to spend a few moments on the word Rav Revin, but it means great. Your actions are great. Machich Remaya Zakif Kvifin. What you do is you take some who think they're up there on top and the Kadosh Baruch Hu will slam dunk them, make them miniature. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu can take people who are down and out and raise them. Zokef Kfufim. Can make somebody who is bent over and unable to stand correctly, make him stand correctly, stand up proudly. Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu can change the course of history. And those who are the great emperors all of a sudden fall, and those who are nobodies all of a sudden get up. Mikimi me afar dal me ashpot yarim evyon. From the garbage, me ashpot yarim evyon. How was Am Yisrael in 1945? And how was Am Yisrael in 1948? If not mikimi me afar dal me ashpot yarim evyon. So here he says mechich remaya v'zakif kififin mashpil ramim. That means he can take those who are high up and make them down, push them down. And the opposite, the flip side, is okay for kufim. Lu yehi gvar shinin alfin. If I would live 2,000 years, lo yas le'ol gvurtech b'chushbanaya, I'd never be able to finish saying everything I wanted to say about him. You know what this sounds like a little bit? The akdamot that we say on Shavuot. Because before he gets to sing the praises, that's a poem we should do maybe before Shavuos. Another Aramaic poem that we'll break our teeth on. But Akdamot milin v'shara yeshusa abla shekilna harmonushuta b'varei treut lahas. I can't do the whole thing, don't worry. But the first few are very, very good. Gvil ilu rikieh. If the entire heavens were parchment, and Darye Arye Safre, and all the trees of the world were pens, and Dio Ilu Yame, and the whole seas were ink, I'd never be able to finish writing the glory of God. That's what we say on every single Shabbat. Take a look at, did I put it? Did I print it? Yeah, source number 9. From Nishmat Kol Chai. Ilu finu malei shira kayam. If our mouths were full of song, like the ocean. Ulshonenu rina kamon galav, and our tongue can wave like the waves. V'siftotenu shemach k'mechavei rakia, and our lips were as white as the heavens. Ve'inenu mirot keshemesh kereach, and our eyes can shine like the sun and the moon. V'yadenu prusot k'nishvei shamayim, and our hands are so wide that like the eagles, the Nishrei Shamayim, like the Adlers, the Neshos and Adler, like the Nishrei Shamayim. V'raglenu kalot kayalot, and we could run as fast as the ayal. Ein anachnu masbikim lahodot lecha Hashem Elokeinu ulevarech et shemcha malkeinu al achat me'elef elef alfei elefim v'rov ribot v'ravot pamim. We'd never, ever, ever be able to complete saying all the praises that we should say for a Kadosh Baruch Hu. So this is a theme that runs every time we say praise to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and Yisrael Najara is echoing this. If I were to live 2,000 years, I would never even get close to completing saying everything I have to say at Kadosh Baruch Hu. Right. So we'll see. So Rivavot and Ravavin. We'll see where the word Ravavin comes from. That's interesting. But the pasuk that I have here on source number 8, Mi Yamalel Gvuot Hashem, Yashmiya Kol Tilato. Tilim, very, very concise, compact. Who is able to express, from the word Melel, who is able to express the Gvurot Hashem, the greatness of God? Who is able to give over all of His glory? David HaMelech said it's impossible. So if it's impossible, why do we do it at all? I remember the Rav talking about this, speaking about the nature of Hallel. Why do we do it at all? He says it's like having Einstein come and you're going to introduce him now as our guest speaker. That in second grade, he could do arithmetic. I mean, it's ridiculous. Even though he couldn't, by the way. Einstein was very, very bad in arithmetic in elementary school. But let's assume, you say something so trivial, and you say nothing about his absolute greatness. So to say whatever we say about HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not even a miniature down payment of what we should be saying about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it could be very insulting. The whole enterprise of Hallel is insulting. So the Rav said once, and I've said this over in different contexts, usually when I sing, that the idea of saying praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Aleph, HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows human limitation, and nevertheless wanted us to praise. He wanted us to do it. Israel. So that also is a praise. We understand. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows that we can't get the whole job in. Do your best. Do whatever you can. Do your best. That's all. But the Rav said further that we have a little bit of a gimmick, and that's when we repeat the final psukim of Hallel from Otcha Ki Anitani, until Hodul Hashem Ki Tov Kilom Chasdo. We repeat the last pasuk of every section of praise. That's why we say Kol HaNeshamat Halel Yahaluya twice by Psukkah de Zimra, because that's our exit strategy. It's as if we're going to say it again and again and again and again and again. So we say it twice because symbolizing, etc., we really want to continue saying it. That's the way we very diplomatically exit any type of saying of Hallel. So here, this business of what Yisrael and the Jar are saying is quite correct in light of the way we understand saying Hallel. What is Rab Ravin? So if you do Shnayim Mikra Ve'echad Targum religiously, and most people don't really do it so religiously. Just past Shabbat, I heard a great share from somebody on the subject. But today, people fulfill the Targum not necessarily by reading Onkelos, but by doing it with Rashi. And some people do it by hearing a drasha in shul from a rabbi who expands a little bit on the parasha. Whatever it is. But when Kadosh Baruch Hu talks to Adam and Chava, when they're being thrown out of Gan Eden, very much early in Sefer Breshit, and there, Adam, the Nachash suggests to Chava, "V'yitem ke'elokim yodei tov ra." If you just eat from this, you're going to be like Elokim. So how does Onkelos translate Elokim? Rav Ravin. Rav Ravin. We'll see what this means in a second. Rashi does not translate like Onkelos. Rashi says, Elokim Yotzrei Olamot. You're going to be creators of worlds. You're going to be creative people, great people. And the Rav, in one of the drashot at the Mizrahi in America, where the Rav used to speak at the Mizrahi conventions, and most people went to the convention to hear the Rav speak, not for all the other blah blah at the convention, right? My aunt and my dear cousin are here. My uncle, Rabbi Aaron Ziegler, Zechron Lebracha, used to travel every year to the Mizrahi conventions. And my Aunt Libby's father, Olav Hashem, Mr. Lefko was a very active person in the Mizrahi in the America. So the Mizrahi conventions were very, very, very important. I can tell you that for some reason I never attached myself. I didn't go. But my brother, Rabbi Yosef Ali, he was one of the regulars at this. But then they printed them. They printed them originally in Yiddish as four drashot. When it finally came out in translation in Hebrew, it became Chamesh drashot. But now you can get it because they added another drasha, and now you can get it in English. It's called the Rav Speaks. So all of these are there. And in one of the drashot, the Rav spoke about that when we were thrown out of Gan Eden, so it says it was Gan Eden was guarded by two things. It was the Cherev HaMitapechet, and it was the Kruvim. So we don't know what the Kruvim is. The Rav said Kruvim is in Parshas, this week's Parsha. It's in Truma, the Kruvim that was on top of the Aron. So the Kruvim meant Sefer, the book, and the Cherev meant the sword. And then there's a medrash on that very story in the end of Gan Eden that Adam was told that you will function. Your derech to Eitz HaChayim is to know how to properly use in proper fashion the sword and the book. What we call Safra v'Saifa, Sefer v'Acherev, right? I mean, the whole concept of Yeshivot Hester is predicated on Sefer v'Sayif, that you have to have both not one to the exclusion of the other. I know there are some people in Israel who think otherwise, but they're wrong. The Safra V'Saifa was the way Rabbi Akiva understood it, the way the Rambam understood it, and the way most of the Gedolei Yisrael understood that Klal Yisrael has to have both Sefer and Saif. So there, the Rav explained that Veitem Kelokim Yodei Tovara, Onkelos said Rav Ravin means great people, strong people, powerful people, brave people. That's what he meant. Onkelos meant Rav Ravin. Rashi meant creative people, which means they're working more with spiritualized intelligence. And the Rav goes on to say that we in the Mizrahi have to have both. That we have to have the Sefer and we have to have the Saif. And he goes on to laud the ideology that posits that you have to have both. And he saw this already embedded in V'yitem Kelokim Yodei Tovara. So this is the Rav Ravin that the Yisrael Najara is using it, not in the sense of Yotzrei Olamot, but rather the way Onkelos understood it. Taking it out of Onkelos, it means Anashim Gedolim, strong, great people. But it's now in reference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Gedolim Ma'asecha V'adirim, Rav Ravin Ovdech V'takifin. Okay, now the fifth stanza. Eloha Dilei Yikar Uravuta. Elokim. It's fourth stanza. Elokim, I'm reading the Hebrew, Shelo Yikar Ugdula. Kadosh Baruch Hu is so precious and great. So we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Perok Yat Anach Mipum Arivata. Deliver your sheep from the mouth of the lions. Where did that come from? From the story of Daniel. From the story of Daniel. Who is in the mouth of the lions? Am Yisrael in Galut. Am Yisrael in exile is in the mouth of the lions. Ve'apech yat amech migoy galuta. And take Am Yisrael, redeem Am Yisrael from the exile. Amcha di bechart, the nation who you chose, mikol umaya, from all the nations of the world. Amcha shebecharta mikol umot. Here he's getting to the point that we need to get out of the galut. And then comes the last one, not just leave the galut and get to Eretz Yisrael, but that's not good enough. We have to have Yerushalayim and Beit HaMikdash. Lemikdashech tuv, tuv means shuv. Taf and shin are interchangeable letters from Hebrew to Aramaic. So that's why in Hebrew, shalosh is 3. In Aramaic, it's tlat. Tlat, right? Tlat mimedit, 3-dimensional. We use it in modern Hebrew. Tlat mimadit means 3-dimensional. How do you say 8 in Hebrew? Shmona. How do you say 8 in Aramaic? Tamnaya. Tamnaya, the shin and the taf. And that's why a mituman is an oxagon. A mituman. An octopus. An octopus and mituman. Right, mituman. So all these words are basically come from Aramaic usage of the number 8 of Tamnaya. But so here, tuv means shuv. A simple flip of the taf to shin. Lemikdashech shuv. Lemikdash, to your sanctuary, your Beit HaMikdash, ule kodesh kuchin. Not enough the Beit HaMikdash. We want everything about the Beit HaMikdash, the Kodesh Kodoshim. So I'll say a word that there's a Mishnah at the beginning of Seder Taharot in Mishnayot that tells us that there are 10 levels of Kedusha, where Chutz La'aretz starts with 0 Kedusha. It's what's called Natul Kedusha. There's no Kedusha in Chutz La'aretz. I know that not everybody likes to hear that. Rav Shamshul Far Hirsch try to sell us an idea that in every Beit Knesset and Beit Midrash and Chutz La'aretz, there's something of the Avirah of Eretz Yisrael. The only thing is that if you grew tomatoes in the Beit Knesset of Frankfurt, you wouldn't have to give Truma. So let's not get carried away here with as a theme that there's some type of Mikdash Me'at. That's already brought down in Yeshayahu, the idea that every Beit Knesset in the world has something of the spirit of Beit HaMikdash. That we can buy. But people shouldn't think that if they're sitting in a Beit Knesset and Beit Midrash Chutz La'aretz, they're Yaitza. They already have part of Eretz Yisrael. That's not what Hirsch meant, for sure not. L'mikdashech shuv tuv u'lekodesh kodeshim. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu not only to bring us back to Eretz Yisrael, to bring back the Beit HaMikdash and the Kodesh Kodeshim. Atar di beyechdun ruchin v'nafshin.
Why is the word Kodesh?
Kodesh Kodoshim.
Yeah. It's one word.
The translation sometimes is
Oh,
carry
it's
it.
because the way it's written.
Sometimes the translation doesn't
That's
fit,
other.
so sometimes
No,
it's
it
carried.
came out on the
It
next.
came out on the next line, that's all. In my page, it's fine. It's the way the printer did it. It's a printer's mistake, that's all. Toad Cipher. Toad Cipher. That's how they resolve 3/4 of the Rambam problems. It's a toy cipher, toy tfus, right? That's a cheap way out, cheap way out. Right, right. Atar di be'yachtun ruchin v'nafshin. Makom bo yismechu kol ruach v'nefesh. Yismechu simcha. Simcha in halacha means standing before HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence. That's what simcha is. V'samachta b'chagecha in its principal way means aliyah l'regel. It's said in Parshat Re'eh, in coming to Beit HaMikdash. That's what simcha is all about. We have lower levels of simcha, but he's talking about standing before every ruach v'nefesh. Everybody has a place in Beit HaMikdash. That's how Shlomo Melech said it in Melachim Aleph, Perek Chet, where he invites the nations of the world to join in their tefillot at Beit HaMikdash. And Yeshayahu says it for Acharit HaYamim, Ki Beiti Beit Tfilah Yikarei L'chol Ha'amim. V'zamrun lan shirin v'zerachshin. And we will sing there the song of praise, perhaps a reference to the restoration of the Shivei HaLevi'im at Beit HaMikdash. V'Yerushalayim Karta de Shufraya. This is why the parking lot by the old city is called Karta, by the way, right? And that's why Neturi Karta is called Neturi Karta, Shomrei HaChomot, or Shomrei HaIr. So here, the city of Yerushalayim, which is Klilat Yofi, the epitome of beauty. So Klilat Yofi, Rav Kook wrote about this in a letter in 1908 to at the opening ceremony of the Bezalel School of Art here in Yerushalayim. And he said that Yerushalayim, unfortunately, was still in mourning. It didn't look as a beautiful city. But Yerushalayim has to be aesthetically beautiful. And he said that perhaps the students and faculty of the Bezalel School of Art will succeed in cultivating a sensation of aesthetics, and we will build a beautiful city here to restore the Klilat Yofi status. I don't know if the Bezalel School of Art managed that, but I will agree that if you just blank out all the cranes and diggings that are going on every other block in Yerushalayim, let's just peek 10 years ahead, and it's going to be absolutely gorgeous. And right now, we're involved in Boinei Yerushalayim. We're still building that Yerushalayim. So here, the author thinks that this is what we're looking for, and so on. So if I mentioned the songs of the Levium, so our Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik Zal was a Levi. His great-grandfather's book was called Beit HaLevi. The Rav is named after him, Yosef Dov Ber Soloveitchik. He was Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, and then becomes the Rav of Brisk, first in Slutsk and then in Brisk. So the Rav we knew, and he admitted it, no Lashon Hara here, Kadosh Baruch Hu did not grant him musical talents. We knew that. We knew that, and he knew it also. So he figured that in the third Beit HaMikdash, he's not going to be part of the choir. So what else would he do as a Levi? So there was another task, and that was to be the honor guard at the Sha'arim of the Gur. And you know what he said about himself? This was an interesting self-evaluation. He said it was Zokein ve'eno lefi chvodo. It wouldn't be proper for a person of his stature to be a doorman. So he didn't think that was proper for him to do. But he gave it a lot of thought. And one year before Yom Kippur, he gave us a series of 3 shiurim on the avodah of the Kohen Gadol. And he told us to bring in a Gemara Masechet Yoma, a Rambam Hilchot Avodat Yom Kippurim, and 2 Machzorim, Ashkenaz and Sfard, because the poems are different. The Ato Konanta of Nusach Sfard and Amitz Koach of the Nusach Ashkenaz. And he shows how the poetry reflect, on the one hand, the Rambam's view, and on the other hand, the Tosfot and Rabbeinu Tam's view. They have reflected in the differences in halacha of how the Kohen Gadol would be doing the avodah properly. And at the end of 3 days of marathon shiurim, which added up to nearly 12 hours of shiurim, he closes all the books, and in about 15-20 minutes, he gives an oral summary of what Mr. Kohen Gadol, Ishi Kohen Gadol, would be doing from morning to night in accordance with all the views. And if it would be this, he would do this. If it would be that, it would be that. And at the end, he breaks out with this great smile, and he says, all right, call in the Kohen Gadol. because I'm going to be his private tutor for the Avodah of Yom Kippur. That's what he saw his role in the third Beit HaMikdash. That was going to be his job. I mean, that is really sensational, because I think it wasn't just for fun that he said it. I think he actually believed it, that he could do it. He was ready to sit down with Mr. Kohen Gadol and teach him what to do. He had a handle on the Avodah on that level. So the rest of the sources were simply, you can look at it at home if you'd like. The psukim were lifted all out of context from Sefer Daniel, as we've shown. And we sing this on Friday night in the spirit of all the other great poets who came out of Tzfat, like Shlomo Levi Al-Kabatz, and so on, because this is what we're yearning for every single Friday night, and that's why we sing it. Ribon Olam. So hopefully now the Aramaic will be less scary and discreet and right, serious, and we'll be able to really pick up and understand. Okay.